Jung wrote in a piece called Psychology and Literature, and he says in it, what is essential in a work of art is that it should rise far above the realm of personal life and speak from the spirit and heart of mankind. The personal aspect is a limitation and even a sin in the realm of art. When a form of art is primarily personal, it deserves to be treated as if it were a neurosis. Now, no doubt the personal enters a lot into your work, and so what do you have to say either for or against this statement?
Balls nonsense to begin with. I mean, I can take this in one sense. I don't know the language, that this was translated out of, but we'll assume that this comes with some some of his ideas directly into English. You get things like what art should rise above is the realm of personal life, and it should speak from spirit and heart of mankind. Okay, like spirit, he's got an okay word there because spirit could be considered as something that floats, like if we were in medieval times, like Dr. Jung apparently mostly was all his life, we could speak of spirit as something that was drifting nebulously above us, and not even be, maybe if we were going to fall into the psychology that could lead to a world blowing itself up, or considering the possibility, well, we could consider that there wasn't even but maybe the thinnest of all possible lines from the realm of personal life leading up to the spirit floating up above and like swimming around the earth. So the point would be blow everything up so that all spirit could be swinging around where the earth once was, and we have all spirit and the least of all possible matter, and we have a whole big spirit thing whirling around in some kind of an imaginary globe of Dr. Jung's mind, and we have a thing going there apparently. But when he says spirit and heart of mankind, like the whole thing falls to pieces because, like I know what the heart is because I've seen it beating, with a dog's chest torn open and photographed that and gone into it with full sensibility to photograph for Dog Star Man, an integral section, and I've dealt with it in editing as human heart. So that the pictures were shot in the first place to get the closest approximation to the actual beat of the human heart, and that as a thing, I see it as a piece of meat that's charged with a movement, and that movement, as I'm motion picture maker, is a prime, like motivating force that's charging that meat. And I've been down inside that heart, down to the microscopic level, and have seen and worked with photographs of individual heart cells, which are the most tiniest blots of material, meat still, each beating with its own impulse, and I've seen the formation where those individual heart cells with a beat, say 5 or 6 of them on a slide, beating individually, and where 2 of them touch, there's a charge between the 2 beats as to which beat will dominate, and where 4 or 5 of them get together, then the one with the strongest beat begins to dominate the beats of all the other, and you have a whole 4 or 5 cell group of individual heart cells beginning to beat with one solid beat, which is dominated by one of those cell beats, and then you have the whole composite of an enormous number of these individual little bits of meat all together forming a very complex beat system, which is the heart that sends, which sends the blood through the whole system and keeps the organism fed, and is the dominant impulse of that organism. And then if you're speaking like of human organism, that all becomes like the way in which all that meat all over the whole system is fed, including brain cells and whatever it is that is being hatched there, even in Dr. Jung's head, does relate direct back to that heart somewhere beating, and that's extremely personal. If I want to say personal, I start with the personality of the individual heart cell and its beat. And how when 4 or 5 of them together, there's a personality that's of a conglomerate, and when there's countless billions of them together, and in relationship to each other, there's a complex beat of all the different chambers of the heart shutting and opening to shuffle that blood and to force it through the whole system. Now that's a personality, and a person that can be viewed as in a mask, in the sense of person. Well, now here betrays, hold it a minute, because here betrays like one part, personal life. I've got to take person for an instant and say it is true. Person has its root source in mask. So when you say, like in the truest sense, if you attach any concern with etymology in your tracing of words, if you say, I'm here in person, it means I'm here in mask, in its clearest sense. But what that mask is always an individual matter. And that is like Dr. Jung started there, in a way, dealing with those masks. I mean, I think that's the point at which Sigmund Freud fainted twice in an evening or something, or and the split began between those two. And I say, realm art, like that would assume this statement, it is essential in a work of art, which, by the way, Dr. Jung never made, that it should rise far above the realm of personal life, that is, the life in mask, and speak from the spirit, which will assume, we can be very nebulous about a word like that, and heart of mankind. Well, I can't be nebulous about something like heart, because in a way I see mask as being, mask, person, beginning to take over on a meat level when it moves from one individual heart cell attaching to 5 or 6 others, and then 50, and then 20, and its beat dominating all the others, so that there becomes one beat of that conglomeration. Then all the other heart cells whose beats were different to begin with could be said to be there in mask, in person, that is, masked under the beat of the dominant cell. There I would define person in that sense, and I would say, if we're concerned with the beat and source of beat, which would be my concern, going to the source of the beat, or if we're talking about taking beat as a movement, the way that blob of protoplasm shuffles itself and squeezes and contracts and releases itself, mysteriously still and enigmatically, and I'd say we would have to go through even the mask of all the other individual and find the one cell there in that particular chamber or section of the heart which is dominating the beat of all the others. So I'd say we'd have to go through, even in that sense, through to if we're going to get through to the meat source of something, or the, where a beat impulse begins, so that our film can have a beginning also. Then there would be some drive on the artist's part to get through to that dominant cell. So it would be to go straight through the mask, even if you're talking about in person or meat in that sense.
Well, Jung talks about the mankind, something about the unifying nature. There's some area, there's some astral plane which connects us all, like its great umbilical cord or something. But it seems that one part of that, at least, is the heartbeat, and I think he was going in the wrong direction. He was going up in the sky, where he should have gone, right, yes, to the heart.
Well, I don't like to say where anyone should have gone. I just like to speak in terms of where I go. I like up in the sky. I have not access to rockets to shoot me up there, or but I have with a camera. And I mean, we have to get practical about that. As an artist, what material I work with. I have a camera that can, go through a microscope and get images off of individual heart cells beating, and get images of a total composite of the heart in motion, and get the physiology in that sense. So that's the direction in which I go at the moment, and the only direction it would be available to a film artist in that sense. And whatever realm of spirit, all right, the minute I'd have to start dealing with trying to imagine with what what was spirit and not dealing with what material was available to me, I'd have to start making up something, or my films would have to become fictional. I'd have to make up a story in order to approximate or imagine that. And I'd have to hire actors. Like, I can even take it this far. I can see myself hiring so many heart cells to beat at a certain rhythm, or making them out of plastic and getting someone to shoot a little electricity through them, so I'd have a set of actor heart cells beating in a certain way. Or, if I had not any other way to get through to the real meat of the matter as prime source for taking pictures. You follow what I'm saying? I mean, every time the word spirit comes up, I notice artists jump immediately to start working with actors, to write stories out of their imagination. There is the only authenticity in that realm I've seen is, like, some of them try to recreate semblances of their dreams. And they hire actors to come in and be the characters that moved through their dream the night before or 3 months past in a certain symbolical fashion, etc., locking the whole thing into a form in which people are making up a story. To me, the direct pursuit is going straight through to what can be real in the instant that I'm making the film. That can, in other words, I'm saying, every time the word spirit comes up, people start fictionizing, imagining, guessing, outguessing, or reenacting in some sense. Unless dream source, like the surrealists had the authenticity that the man who made the work presumably at one point had a dream or a series of dreams that charged that form. So he hired actors to recreate that dream, and he had sets built to approximate what visions came to him in his dreams. But that's much more dangerous, and let's put it this way, much less essential in a work of art as a process than being able to strike image, whether painter, or strike word order if poet, or strike sound if composer, or strike images if a filmmaker, directly off something that can be worked with in that direct one-to-one ratio. Then our concern with, like, spirit, if we mean by that, like, all the invisible, that which we don't know what makes the individual heart cell expand and contract. Last report from, like, Dr. Cooper, who was my source on this, the University of Colorado Medical School in Denver, was that it was still, like, very no real solid theories yet as to why an individual heart cell would contract. And only kind of guesses as to why one heart cell's beat would dominate all the others and set a dominant beat for a glob of heart cells. So I say, in the light of that, we can, imagine or hope that some, if we're careful enough in the study of those individual heart cells, we can hope the spirit of the invisible, of what causes that beat, some feeling thereof will pass through sensibilities and emerge onto film. That's a hope, and that's really, in a way, the drive. But how are we ever to touch spirit if it's something we only imagine? The reference is only in terms of dreams, which we have very little, which even Jung would know we have very little, i.e., perspective about. That is, there's only one set of eye rulings that run in a straight line, what dream we remember in the morning. And if the other spectacle of that perspective is simply to take that dream we've had and add, which is like a pince nez, and add to it another spectacle which is called like 4,000 years of developing symbolism through Greek or something, then it seems to me those are very faulty spectacles. I'd throw them away the same way I threw away or let's say, I'd throw that set of spectacles as a prime working order away, at least in the same sense as I threw my glasses away when I was 18, and go for what it is that this set of sensibility, this meat order, this meat which is my eyes, and this meat which composes the nerve endings inside those eyes, and that whole chain of meat that leads back into brain structure meat and all those connections inside the brain, I'd go for that order as a direct way through to spirit. Because otherwise, any way you look at it, I'm in the position having to make up a story or having to depend too much upon those spectacles. Now, once I'd gotten through to an order where I was dealing directly with myself as meat bulk in that sense, then I could begin to make that answer to what people, make it speak and be in relationship to what all those that had worn glasses also had seen. And there are relevancies. But to go directly with a pince nez and a colored glasses out of Greece up into the up in imagination up into the sky is only like making up a story.
I think a part of what Jung may have been, I don't know Jung, but anyway, angels and myth and how things kind of happen as they should somehow beyond personal abilities, or what seems beyond personal abilities, that's somehow very involved with the work.
Well, he ends the thing by saying, when a form of art is primarily personal, it deserves to be treated as if it were a neurosis.
Yeah, he also says in there it's a sin, doesn't he?
The personal aspect is a limitation and even a sin in the realm of art.
Even a sin. Well, there you have old Dr. Jung, straight through, like a medieval monk, which one tends to become, anyone sitting in Switzerland that long, like coming on with good and evil in relationship to art. And sin, whose sin is he referring to? I mean, that's like telling a plumber that because he thinks that he ought to start on the 5th floor to get, the diaper that's clogged in the drain out first before he goes into the basement and deals with this and that he's committing a sin by taking a roundabout route, or like telling a taxi cab driver that thinks he's found you the fastest route to get from 42nd Street to 53rd and gets caught in a traffic jam somewhere, to call him sinful for so doing, which he may have intended, in which case he was like overcharging you or something like that, but which could just be a mistake. I always tend to go for the professional, at some point I may argue with someone to a certain extent as to which way the plumbing ought to be fixed, but I know a plumber, if I call in a specialist like a plumber, I have to rely that he knows his job and he knows what he's doing. And if I get a statement on plumbing, I want it to come from a plumber, and I mean not the man back at the office who shuffles papers, and I mean not someone who has wild theories on plumbing that don't, apply directly, but the man that actually comes and fixes the toilet or the sink or whatever. In this sense, that's why I've always been, and rightfully so, extremely suspicious of any non-artist definition of art. There again, Dr. Jung is imagining what an art should be, and has apple pie in the sky ideas about it, which don't apply to those that are working directly with material and concerned with bringing the invisible into visibility, and or making the visible visible, which is already job enough. No, you follow my meaning. I know what I'm talking about because the invisible passes through me and comes into an approximation of being, and that approximation is there to inspire others. It is charged and enclosed in a form enough where it can inspire others to be aware of that which was invisible before, which always has to do with the spirit, in the simple sense of what we're growing into, what we're becoming. But to call spirit something which is unattainable and has only the most tenuous thread to our living meat reality as we move through this world and all its contingencies and bump into the walls and nearly get run over and dance in the streets thereby and so on, that has nothing to do with a spirit. To me, that can only be a fictional spirit or a stylized spirit which may or may not have roots in living sensibility and in living action, that's okay. So that makes the trail line of that white cloud of spirit, or however Jung wants to picture it, that floats around above the human or something. That makes that trail line just a fairy tale reaching down to touch the meat sensibility. And I say, let's search among where we are and what's happening. That's the only way I can proceed, because otherwise, again, you see, the camera, which makes film. This statement I'm going to make shows how film is one of the most vital of the arts in this century, because the camera and the lenses and all the equipment is designed to derive its patterns of light and shade and color and so on directly off of something that can be seen right here. And that can be altered in every possible way for every possible need and contingency of the artist moving through it. But there is always like a direct line between something that is seen by the artist and what will pass through that lens and become transformed onto film, etc., and be ready for treatment and editing and so on, and eventually to be cast back again. There's a direct line that can be traced, and in order to deal with a spirit which is only imagined, which I don't reach through directly touching something, I have to create a fiction. I have to bring in actors. I have to create a land, a fantasy made up out of tinsel and tissue paper and actors and people motivated according to my will. Dr. Jung liked to motivate people according to his will, obviously. To even superimpose some dynamic sense of will, or to create a whole realm. He was concerned with making a realm in that sense, which took, like, almost social consciousness takes its new form in that sense. But you know what? If the guy says to you, what do you think of people that like meet you somewhere? Like yesterday, I met this guy, and he says to me, "The world." He says, "In the year 2000, there will be no more people on the face of the earth." And he said, "Because the machines will take over." And I said, "Oh, what's your crystal ball?" And finally it got down to the simple thing, like, are you reading too much science fiction? Or like, have you read the famous classic on relationship machine to human, i.e. cybernetics? No, he hadn't read it. Have you ever seen an IBM machine? No, he hadn't. Well, I've made 2 commercial films on IBM machines. I said, have you ever been in Bell Laboratories? Over in New Jersey? No, he'd never seen Bell Laboratories. I said, have you ever even looked at Einstein's theory of relativity? Which I can look at as beauty as a sheet of music or a form. He said, no. I said, okay, well, you're in this position. You're trying to give voice to your despair, your contemporary despair, by casting out get rid of your life in the sense, or all life in the sense that a machine can do it for you. And I said, yet you don't want this, so you cast it into the year 2000. I said, now this is perfectly authentic for you personally if you can close it in some kind of form, the beauty of which I can see whether I believe in your theories or not. Then it's of some access to me. Otherwise, you're just spinning, yarns, which if I chose to be at all interested in them, couldn't help but be entangling, because it's a specious casting out of your despair into something shapeless. Now, till Dr. Jung defines the spirit in some relationship to absolute shape, which in his way he did through his life's work. That is, he made a fiction of a shape as to what spirit would stand for. But as it comes as a moral statement, which I take this to be out of context, I cannot look at the beauty of it like I can at the sheer laying out of numbers and figures and signs and symbols and the theory of relativity across the page, which reads like a sheet of music, whether I can understand one symbol or number, rack up, or formation in it. There's a beauty to it which rises off the page. Now, to me, all the rest of it is the invisible, but my source through to it is the beauty of an organization across a page, blank pages as I turn them, page after page. Now, I can go for something in that sense, but never, like, there's no beauty to the way these words lie out on this page here. There's no reference to what Jung meant by spirit. His fiction of the spirit is not shaped here. And I'm blocked 6 ways sideways in trying to come at it because I have nothing to get a hold of. This statement is just the same as someone saying to me, what would you think? Saying to me in the year 2000, etc., etc. Anything in the year 2000, or any kind of prophecy, or any kind of statement that occurs as a moral statement as to what's a sin. Someone can define sin for me if it occurs within a balanced work, so I can see the beauty of the whole total form of that work, whether it's in numbers, words, notes on staffs, canvas, or whatever. Then sin can have a place within that. But in order to have it in an art realm, it has to be balanced by non-sin in such a way that there's no jagged edge sticking out, i.e. an index finger pointing saying, thou shalt not, etc. And like Dr. Jung, not being an artist, didn't understand that. Okay?
Yeah. There's many artists like Cocteau have said that the artists that best remain unmarried. Now, no doubt you you have taken the opposite course and even gone so far as to have 4 children. Could you give a opposite theory of your own, sort of what benefits marriage has to the artist?
Just a simple sense of saying that I live my life according to necessity, to my own necessities as much as possible, and that makes that at least I have is an integrity of form. I assume that Baudelaire did also. All right, and Cocteau also, and so all I would be talking about here would be like personal benefits which come from following my own individual necessity. No, I can't make a rule or a law or a set of logic or there, in that sense, in relationship to it, like I need children, and Jane needs children too, and so we make children, and then they need us, and they need each other, and they start needing other things in life, and the whole thing's, each person, we try to set a milieu in our household where each follows his own necessity without interfering with the necessities of others, and that's, like a form, and out of that sense of form and balance, like Jane and I work together to create. And out of other necessities, like the necessity to see better and to give that a form and a shape, which it does most clearly for us in the realm of art, and to bring all of what we don't see, the invisible or spirit, if you like, in that sense, into visibility, and or to bring children of, like, our need for children postulates only imagination until we have a child, and then or 2 or 3, and then all the terms keep shifting, and so we keep close line to our necessities and our direct needs in that sense, and that continues to make a form, and we're making a form out of it by following necessities most personally, well, in the simple sense, like we make love when we need to make love. And when only I need to feel that I need to make love and Jane doesn't, like, that's sure to be rape, and that's not what I want, so in one way or another, and so we don't make love that night, and then within a day she too will need to, maybe, or 2 or something, and then we'll make love, and so forth, and following necessity, but never forcing one over another, because that would not be true to the necessity. If sometime I did need to rape, I suppose I would. But otherwise, that necessity remains until it's possible. If we need to make love, for 2 people to make love together, and like that, maybe that girl there, Crystal, needs a peanut butter sandwich right now, and we have peanut butter and bread, and Jane gets up and fixes her peanut butter sandwich, and it's like that. But if we don't have peanut butter in the house at the moment, or if we're too busy or something, or if it interferes with some more prime necessity of mine, we could only, like, hurl peanut butter sandwich at her, which she doesn't need, i.e. she doesn't need it given grudgingly. So, or sometimes she might be that hungry that even if we had to grudgingly give it, we'd give peanut butter sandwich. That's like maintaining a form by remaining in relationship to how much peanut butter you got on the shelf and how much bread in the box and so forth, and And whether my hard-on is because my pants are too tight and I was walking a certain way, or whether because the impulse is rising from the deep centers of me to make love, like that. And if it is, usually it arises, through both of us more or less with a pretty close timing. But we watch the timing in that sense, and then the timing makes that a fulfillment in relationship to. A fulfillment not of, but in relationship to the necessity. And so that's how a form is made. And I don't see any difference between a life form in that sense and between a work of art. Do you?
Well, it's different.
Well, sure, because it doesn't have to answer specifically to 2,000 or 4,000 years of Western culture and to the East and so on.
Well, in a way it does
sure.
that, but it doesn't. I don't know. It's different.
That's how the work of art gets removed and shapes itself into a sphere, or however you want to picture that. Shapes itself so that it answers unto itself and all other works of art that its necessity dictates rise through it too, or history.
It also answers to to lives. A work of art answers to life. I mean, I'm just contradicting myself,
I don't get you.
Okay.
Well, go ahead, tell me. No, follow through, Jane.
Yeah, I say a work of art answers to lives as it answers to history.
You mean in its coming into being? It answers to a need in our living, like that?
It answers to living, to lives.
I think
Well, like my need to make love answers to your need to make love, and that's a need in life. That's an answer to life, so I don't see the distinction there. Like, it seems to me they're just different needs. But the process still seems the same to me. Like, sure, every action we take in any living answers to lives in some sense, questions lives also. But the difference in the work of art is that it has a removed integrity, maybe almost tensegrity, to coin Bucky Fuller's phrase, which is, but then it becomes in life. I guess that's what Jane's trying to prompt through here, is that then a work of art, caps or no caps, or in quotes or not, when something's finished and it's I see what you mean. When it's finished, it is in our living experience then, and in that sense, there is no distinction. It's just I get hung up at times in the process of making it, because that's where I have to keep a clarity. But sometimes I keep too much of a clarity, like when I start yelling yesterday, the children cannot color here on this table where I'm going to be spreading out these pieces of film. Now, why would I ever say such a thing? That's like, I keep sometimes trying to build an ivory tower, even in this corner of a room, which is what I have for a workroom now, a corner of our one living room. I still try to rise an ivory tower here, which is going to get me to Greece or something by the silver zephyr of cold steel removal. And that would be very sad, because I would lose the whole possibility of what happens when the children's colored crayons spill out across a table, which is the only table we have in that living room. It has to be shared by me and the children, and Jane has to be able to put a coffee cup on it too when she's sitting there reading something, and it's the only place where they can sit down and color and draw at this moment, and it's the only place where I can stretch out these strips of film of what I'm working on in part 4. So all these things have to be across that same table, and at the same time there's some sense, like they are answering to entirely other needs when they color and draw on their papers there than what I am, or than what Jane is when she's like putting together the scrapbook there. All 3 processes are going there, but if you're talking about as they meet in life, there's no difference. There's certain, the process that is each answering to his own necessity is clear. And the children are often more clear about that than than I am, because I have to muddle my way through everything that people tell me, or all my distractions or theories that I lay down. Whereas they're just, laying down an orange with a certain pressure, which has to do with how much pressure they can give it, and something they've seen of it, and how it's taking shape there, out of an immediate impulse, which is whereas, the basic process should be no different if it's working through necessity. Any instant I'm involved in making a work of art and having it answer to the works of art that will rise through it, that are previous and of its necessity or of its impulse, anytime I do that and lose thereby sense that I'm working out of necessity only, well, then I just have to tear up everything I've made that day and redo it. Or any time that, like, the children become distracting to me in that process because they're also crayoning there, or some problem or some other problem is impinging on that process, I'd best quit if I'm going to be that easily distracted. If all these necessities can't exist in interrelation, then it won't be a good working time anyway.
Well, it's like also what is the greatest thing to do at this moment, and if the greatest thing to do at this moment is go to work on a film, well, for God's sake, do it.
Yeah,
but if it's something else, if it's have a peanut butter sandwich or go take a walk or whatever, why then do that.
Yeah, like I remember once I was starting to work on something, and I really felt like I really had to work on it. It was a tremendous feeling in me, but I couldn't get started, and I couldn't figure out what was wrong. And I kept trying to start and couldn't get it going, and the children were having their nap, and Jane was out or something, and I suddenly I got up. And I went and filled a water pitcher and watered all the plants in the house without hardly thinking. Every plant in the house. And all the earth in the plant pots were very dry. And I watered every plant in the house. And then I could go back and sit down and went to work beautifully. Like, that was impinging on me at that moment. Those plants were damn near dying from lack of water. And
they
that had to come
scream
first,
sometimes. When they get real thirsty, they scream.
Gee, they create a tremendous atmosphere in the house, in that funny way. So, water the plants first, then go to work. Like, it didn't take me 5 minutes, but it taken me forever if I'd have sat there trying to work while those plants needed watering, and I was aware of it, see. Some part in my mind was very insistent about the watering of those plants. And God knows, maybe it was a direct, I don't know what influence was needed. Wonderful word at this point when you're talking about watering plants. Influence was needed in my working process at that moment that the watering of the plants gave to me for the continuance of my work. But, like, that was needed. Another time, I suppose I could have let the plants, go for, till Jane watered them later or something, but at that moment, that was in my mind. And I couldn't work without dealing with it. And I want all of as much material as can pour into that process, through my all of whatever my necessities have brought into being. That is our whole relationship, and the children, and the plants we have in the house, and the kind of house we have, to be directly related to the necessity which is also making work come through me. And this is what makes it possible for Jane and I to work together, because we're not concerned with a removed process. As, in a working order which only speaks, to abstractions. We're concerned with the necessities, and that means all the necessities that have to do with all our relationship and everything we've brought into being and ordered and shaped around us are all impinging on each other and impinging on that prime necessity, which is the working necessity, which continues to make the works of art flow through us. And, like, one necessity dominates over another only in terms of timing, like this is the time to work, and this is the time to water the plants, and this is the time to change Bertham's diapers, and so forth. And you leave out any one of those, and the whole fabric starts coming apart at the seams, like they say. And then it would be easy when the real fabric that you have of your life starts coming apart at the seams. Then is the time when I, at least, can make the terrible mistake of being more concerned with what's seeming, and that to me would lead directly to whatever it seems to me, which would make it, hyper selfish in a way, and then it would be my will making a beseeming type thing, and then I would like be hiring actors and building sets and making fictional lands, making a story, making up a story, which would be a lie. I think we've had too much of Dr. Jung's kind of lying. I'm talking now about his moralistic statement here, and leaving everything in reference to that, because the major body of his work in the realm he was creating, I have never been able to get into enough to speak with any authority on it. And I don't want to quarrel with that. I'm just talking about this statement in the context that you've read here, which is, as you read it here, is a moralistic statement, because it even goes so far as to say a sin. It's a sin to do things one way and not another. Now, another artist may find his whole necessity in complete and entire removal and in fictionizing, making up stories. And it's a common form, so to speak. But that doesn't seem to me, and I would not want to be in the position of saying that were a sin, that way to work. It would be a sin for me to work that way, I suppose. It would, in the sense that it wouldn't fulfill my necessities. But
well, you made Blue Moses kind of that way. Only it started with a very inspired. Well, it went on inspired. I don't know what it was.
No, Blue Moses wasn't that at all. Blue Moses was that. Well, in the working orders, it was. The source was one thing.
Every Saturday, Benson came over. It was funny.
That was more like a ritual, though. He was an actor, but he was acting his acting. So we set up there something like Strindberg's mirrors in the 19th century. So he was acting his acting, and in so doing, it's like saying, it was a double negative, which makes a positive. And in that sense, he was. It was a real scene. Yes, he came over every Saturday, but some Saturdays nothing happened, some others did, and we set a ritual. It's like every Saturday. He was there, and we went out and tried to do something, and were careful only to deal with that material that was coming truly through in his acting, and in my following the original impulse. And not following it to the expense of the impulses that were occurring at each stage in making Blue Moses. It was a weird situation in the sense that I never, for instance, to me, I've often thought it's preposterous when I hear that Thomas Mann would write a page every day. And at the end of the page, even if he was in the middle of a hyphenated word, he'd stop. And the next day he'd write the next page. Well, that's incomprehensible way of working for me, and or G.B. Shaw's, which was to get up in the morning and work so many hours or something, and that was that. That's incomprehensible to me as a way of working, but I wouldn't, call it a sin. I would look at the work, so to speak, and in a way, that was something of what we were setting up a ritual every Saturday for Benson to come over and trying to deal with that in ritualistic form. And out came a film, the only film I've made that involves an actor in the last 6 years, and the only film that had a script.
Is it just coincidence that the visual presentation of Prelude to Dog Star Man is reminiscent of an LSD experience?
Well, to be clear about it, I've never taken LSD, and I don't intend to. I've never taken any drugs except those that cure colds and various other things, or penicillin, things like that, if you can call that a drug, to meet those that are given to me by doctors, etc., with the single exception of marijuana. I've had several of those cigarettes, and that's it, and I shy clear of that whole drug scene. I do because I have so many impulses coming in that are of an order that are taken directly off of my sight seeing, that all of that drugging or bugging of the system, or creating a crisis within my system by those artificial means, seems to me to be a distraction. And I mean distraction in the sense of no traction there. And that is, I can't get going there. And everyone talks about it turning them on, and who takes various kinds of drugs, and I say, okay, well, it turns me off, and I let it go at that. Physiologically, my terminology is more correct. The taking of a drug is a turn off. It's a poisoning of the system and creating a crisis. Well, to me, there's enough like crises in daily living existence to charge the system and excite the system, my system, in that sense, that I don't feel the need of that drug scene. Now, to answer your question another way, though, it is interesting that, for instance, the person that's taken drugs with the most care, and I mean like painstaking care, is Michael McClure. And he's taken, just every kind of drug, and even at one point, scientists were, giving him new forms of LSD, where the chain had been altered a little this way, a little that way, and he was writing his experiences for them, and at the same time he was, they were pouring through his work. He always took drugs with clear relationship to his work, his working orders, and with the intent in relationship to the creation of poetry. That gave him a clarity which made it possible for him to move from drug to drug and finally to stop taking anything that he was involved with when enough of the charge had gone through him to create poetry out of that instant. Now, the relevance of this is that, say, peyote, he arrived at some of the very exact same visions, or seeming exact same visions, as I did, simply by meditation of various kinds. And I don't mean like yogi meditation or anything of that. I just mean like sitting and leaving the eyes open and seeing intensely, focusing the whole system on sight, what was pouring in through the eyes with the eyes open. And, like remaining in that situation, which is for a long length of time. And now I saw Elfskin in that circumstance, and I saw a kind of pure white light emanating from walls, furniture, everything in that circumstance, and he saw that same kind of vision under peyote. And he gave it the term Elfskin, which he found somehow by going back into the Anglo-Saxon. And so we had a relevance of vision, at least let's put it that way. He through peyote, I through that kind of meditation that I've described. One way, you see, I created a crisis in my system by that much attention. He created it by poisoning his system with peyote. So there's an example. Doesn't matter which way something's arrived at. It was in both cases a bringing of something ordinarily invisible to human eyes into consciousness. I brought it in through the medium, gave it an approximation in the medium of film, particularly in The Dead and also in Dog Star Man Part 2 or even in The Prelude. He brought it into being and gave it order in terms of language. And both are authentic. Neither one of us was fictionalizing or making up a story. This clarity about fiction, I should tab, this comes from Charles Olson. He said at Vancouver when he was up there, I'll approximate, I'm an old scoundrel when it comes to fiction. I mean, I don't like fiction. I mean, like making up a story. He pegged that there was some aspect of the art of fiction which at least had become in our time, or to him specifically, a lie. I read it the same way. And you see, like, I think too, something that produces that moralistic statement by Jung had an authenticity at a time in human endeavor that it does not have at the present time. But if there are human beings in this earth that can get into that medieval an attitude, I suppose they could strike great works of art through just specifically following his instructions there in this given time, and that would be an incredible phenomenon. But I would view it a little bit like a freak. It would be exciting and thrilling to think one could have that medieval an attitude and produce something of vital necessity in this time, but and for time to come, or in this order of our development of creation. But for me it would be very freakish and unusual, and not the more usual, not
be abnormal.
very abnormal. Like anyone who could do that, I would say, might in the rest of their life be, what does he say here, deserve to be treated as if it were a neuroses. See? I think, you know, or it might not. Like, they might very much like that whole medieval consciousness they were swinging on, and not need any treatment at all. You know, but certainly I can't see how in the world anyone that's working out of necessity of his daily living and making a whole scene that has that integrity needs to be treated for neuroses. I kind of think with treatment in that sense, like that would have to be of a necessity too. Like if suddenly I got so removed in thoughts of spirit or something that I couldn't cross the street without endangering others or myself in so doing, then if I intended to continue to cross streets in this society, I would need to be treated by someone so I could get down to earth enough to get out and get my groceries, you see. But
well, when you were working on the dead, you were very troubled that way.
yeah, well, the dead, God, the dead is very much, or even more, we could say, Serious Remembered, huh? All the
Well,
time I
Serious
worked on
Remembered
Serious
is different.
Remembered, every time I sit down to work on it, I had diarrhea tremendously, and I really needed to be treated for diarrhea.
Yeah, but that's
I did treat myself for diarrhea, but at the same time, as long as I worked on that film, I was constantly plagued by diarrhea, and yet I had to go on making that film, of course. And the dead too. It's very kind of rooted in the medieval in a certain specific way as source of inspiration. After all, the very stones that had created the light forms and shapes that were moving through that work were mostly medieval. And I got to where it was hard for me to manipulate. I was like very sick, ill. It was pretty hard for me to get out and get the groceries or move around or something. Yeah. See, I wouldn't attack this as a statement, Jung. It just it isn't the first thing I would advise to a young artist, you know. I mean, like somewhere later I might say, well, this too might be of some help to you, but basically I don't think it's a direct route to allowing. I think Jung and I both share this, and in feeling also apparently, because many people very involved in Jung see a great deal of relevance in Jung's work to mine, although I can't read 3 pages of his in translation, which is my only access, without finally bogging down. Of his prose style, that alone bogs me down, and the ideas do too. But all the same, in feeling, we were after some. I think both. It might be said that both of us are concerned with bringing the invisible into being. Now, I'm just suggesting what I think, what certainly is for me, and what I think generally is a more direct route. And a more relevant, more charged route for the arts. And I can also speak with the experience of being an artist that I don't think the attitude that he's suggesting here for the creation of art is one that could work in any but a very freakish circumstance in our time.
You know what's really strange about the times is, you remember Rilke's statement that poetry is something about trying to make the visible invisible, or
yeah.
something like that, that someday poetry will achieve this goal. And now there's all the feeling in all the artists to make the invisible visible.
Yes, but
to
actually,
see what is
I
there.
think
But
it,
I think it's all the same somehow.
yeah.
That Rilke was saying the same thing that you're saying, only he was saying it with a different way of looking at it, or just kind of.
He was speaking more in terms of the actual picking up of the image and creating a word order. And in some simple sense, he meant to name a thing is to make it invisible. And I've been clear about that in the introduction of metaphors, where I say, when the child says, "What is that?" and the father says, "That's a tree," that shape, object, existing, visible thing begins to be invisible to the child. And that's one of the present dangers. Well, he meant like a working order of words could take from the sight relevance of a thing and make it invisible, because it would pass into language. Now, but in terms of the reception, when that becomes a poem, when that working order becomes an entire poem, it inspires sight, which I can say very clearly because it has Rilke's poetry. Much of his poetry has inspired sight in me. For instance, the concept of trees rising up as one walks, and I forget which poem, was absolute clear source of inspiration in Anticipation of the Night, in which that as a vision, the rising up of trees as one moves through them, was a prime flowering vision in that film. Well, now we can trace the process through clearly. The word order makes that image of trees rising up invisible in the instant that it takes shape in the language. But that shape in the language does throw back in relationship to how trees are seen when the poem is read. Trees being seen then did inspire my taking the camera and following through with the camera, that sight of the trees in relationship and inspired by that poem, and making a dance which produces, after the film's developed, a film created of shades of color and blacks and whites and so on, which can then be cast back as image inspired by that vision. And that image in turn re-inspires vision, and so forth. Now that's a chain in which it's constantly a process of the visible becoming invisible, and visible again with in some new charge sense, and invisible again and visible again. But at each transference from visibility to invisibility, there's some other long line running through here, which is an increased visibility. Because at each stage that tree and the way in which one can move in relationship to it comes into a being consciousness in human beings. There is an increased visibility. Of course, we're stumbling all over the place here, because what we ought to have is like words and then pictures and words and pictures here, because Robert Duncan would be clear about all this. We're still all talking about words, and he would say that tree can only be visible or invisible in language, because visibility and invisibility are words. So what I should really be doing here is like using a few words and taking this through the Rilke part of it, and then showing you the image from Anticipation of the Night, and then follow through the process and see how we feel at each stage, and see whether there isn't some, see, like my hands are going like crazy here. I'm making tree shapes with my fingers and rounding out and creating this movement because I would like to, I can't impress that on this tape you're making, but if I could, we would have we'd be getting closer to the feeling of what we're talking about. And really, maybe I should say it is feeling that comes out of non-feeling in this process, and just chuck the words visible and invisible at some point and say that the whole visible and invisible works as words to describe a process of a series of transformations, but that it's an increasing of feeling that's really happening here. When you take that process through thousands and thousands of years of one artwork speaking to another, and one imaging something that's charged in language in another, etc. And like I.
But You know, I mean, like Duncan says, we are talking words, and that's all for the tape anyway.
Yeah.
And it's all words, whatever feelings come out in different people who hear it or read it. So that's their business. You may have feelings, you put it into words, or you make words anyway out of your feelings, and then from then on it's somebody else's business.
Yeah, like see, like the children are about there to, you know, they're dancing in relationship to those whirling tapes, and that too should be on those tapes. And maybe, like, if one of them, if Neilman happens to stick her finger into that tape in a moment, we might have an approximation of that, which had been described. So what would we call that? An illustration of what I'm talking about. That I described the scene and tapes, Stan said, like that. See, they're dancing around those whirling, you know, like plastic reels there, and they might create another approximation other than language if she'd stuck her finger in that tape and it'd go something like that, and words would slur out, and we'd begin to have a sound poem, which was an impression of a happening here too. I'd like some sense of that to at least be shot through all this sense of words, because words are beginning to, you know, like I can't get the movements of my arms onto that tape. I can't get, you know, the children dancing around those reels onto that tape, and really, that should be there too, to have some meaning of what we're saying here. Like the hell of a problem you're going to have when you transcribe this tape and you find out to make this a language that can be read, in which what we're talking about will come through to a reader, is something quite different than having the charge of this moment as just a sound sequence. Or there's two entirely different things of that interview I had with P. Adam Sidney. There's the printed version in the book as an introduction, and there is the tape itself. And they're really two entirely different things in which we had to work with all the authenticity of translator for one solid week, struggling constantly to make a translation of what was on the tape, to be printed as an introduction to the book and have them be relevant. Anyway, I feel excited, so it must be okay, huh? We must be doing something here.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, I'm learning something. I feel pulled up, particularly by the statement of James relevant to Blue Moses, which is, I could start spinning too tight a theory here, you know, in that sense.
That's what I was saying also with what you do in the moment, you know.
Yeah, like, I don't know, I might have to build myself an ivory tower at some point later, you know, or I have to be open too, so that if at some place it becomes crucial for me for me to feel that when a form of art is primarily personal, it deserves to be treated as if it were neuroses, some work or some necessity of mine to bring something into being may require an instruction like this, so that all of person goes completely out of it. And there are certain works of art that have the seeming being of impersonality, non-mask, which are incredibly exciting to me. Like, I think almost immediately of some of John Cage's music, particularly that piece that Duncan pointed out as being so marvelously impersonal. Which one is that, Jane? Do you remember in the Journal for the Protection of
I don't remember.
Beings? Duncan, in an essay, points out this piece of.
We don't have it in the house.
I don't have half my library here with me. Journal for Protection of All Beings. Duncan points out a particular piece of John Cage's, and I absolutely agree that that's the one that of all those I've heard that comes the closest to a kind of impersonality, where the personality of the artist is tremendously removed from the piece of music. Well, Of course, many of Cage's processes, permit this in a way that very few others that I've seen in this century do. This kind of impersonality, and I mean the deepest sense of it, no mask.
Oh, yeah, but he fails beautifully at that all the time.
Yeah, there's a failure beautifully at it, which can be clearly seen when John Cage's, like if you hear some of the Cage disciples, you suddenly begin to realize, I can always spot a piece of his music from any disciple with a clarity that's fantastic, that's more than I can with many another composer in this age. And it's right on the basis that there's something of John Cage's person coming through as sound, which is always there. And some of it that is imitative, which is there too. But there's an aspect that's always clear, that would be his personality. I mean, he who... Or something, or his angels, or the forces that move him, right, Jane, or like Jane says, his angels, or the forces that move him, whatever term you want to give it. His muse, some would say, there's some force which moves through him that is unimitatable. So that his, whatever music I hear that's like his, I can almost always tell from his. It's a very... his, I don't know how to put it, it's...
I don't think you can deserve to say.
Well, it's sort of like this. I'm just looking around this kitchen. I'm seeing that, there are certain sounds that are going on here that...
Yeah, can you catch these eggs cooking?
But there's a way in which Jane stirs eggs, which she's right now doing, which makes them fry in a certain particular way. And there's a way in which each of the children moves distinct from every other, and there's a way in which all of them move in relationship to each other, which is very special. And this is going on, sounds produced by these movements and gestures within our house produce a kind of how shall we say, a sound style, so that if one's ears were keen enough, one could tell whether this were being recorded in the Brakhage household or not, if one had been that clear about it. Whether we're in, and they could also tell, well, this would be from the New York, when we were in New York, because of what's coming up through that window, or this would be, from some removed period where we were out. If the ears were keen enough, you could describe a style here. And that remains constant, even though, in some sense, all these, many of these sounds being produced here are like what might be defined as chance operations, or, due to chance operations, or random happenings, in a way.
I wouldn't describe them that way.
Well, I don't know what to describe as random, and finally I don't think really John Cage would either. Like, randomness would have to be something very much worked for. It's something like he's after that bell-shaped curve. If you funnel a bunch of grains through and this is out of Darcy Thompson, if you funnel a bunch of grains through a funnel down onto the earth, you produce a cone, or Mount Fuji, say. But if you invent, create a wild random way to scatter those grains, the wildest randomness possible in the scattering of those grains, if the wind is blowing all different directions and everything, and you scatter enough grains, you'll produce a bell-shaped curve, or the average of something more approximate to an average mountain shape. Now that bell-shaped curve is the most constant curve going in all mathematics. And it's produced by the most randomness. You get more and more of a bell-shaped curve the more random things come to play on that grain scattering. And there's two ways to view that. It's kind of beautiful as a concept. And remember, mathematics we're taking now as a realm here, not calling it some super reality or something. It's a realm of man's creation. But it's interesting that the most solid curve in it is premised where there's the most of what language would call chaos. And in that sense, what I'm saying is Kitchen's right. This is like there's a style happening here because all these movements are out of some immediate necessity of everyone in this house. And there's very few, like a paper might fall off the wall, and I might not know what that paper's necessity was or be able to define that, so I would call that a random happening. Or I might tend to regard the streets of New York and the noises produced there as extremely random, but I know better as I grow older because I have to come to terms with a particular aspect of vicious movement and the struggle for a kind of joy down there in those streets in that particular hell, which doesn't permit me anymore to consider that random. It gets harder and harder to define what's a random movement or to make it. Now, whether Cage's direction is to really create randomness, well, in that sense, then he would be failing because there is a style to his music which is as approximate, can be recognized by those who love his music as I do and have listened to it this long, just the same as I can differentiate the way Jane fries eggs from probably damn near anyone else. And so I can't... that kind of impulse as direction, or to take direction from that kind of impulse of a pursuit of randomness, it might be considered purely one of the struggles of this age to rid man, we can be symbolic for a minute here, of mask or personality. It would seem authentically exciting to me, and I'm not going to stop at authentic, I mean authentically exciting to me, if it were for the bringing into being of some invisibility, like beneath or through or under or around mask. And to that extent, I pursue the breaking up of the mask. And I'm not concerned with reforming or making a mask in its place. Although probably in at least 100 years there will be a vital concern, maybe sooner, a vital concern with reforming mask and with individual mask and with some new terms for personality.
Yes, but
and I'm not talking progress here. I don't mean that.
I think trance operations is a very definite and very solid mask.
Are you using...
I don't know what it is. I just mean that if the...
it seems like it's breaking up everything and making everything possible, and in a way it is. But in a way it's a very, very definite and solid mask.
Yeah, it's a bell-shaped curve mask.
Are you using the word random in sort of sense of spontaneity?
Well, I'm probably using it in a random fashion, yeah. Which is probably not very wise of me.
Well, how does this relate to your filmmaking? I mean, do you...
Well, let's put it this way. For the most part, this depends on each and every individual film, and I'm not ever in any of these comments speaking, for the future, because I don't prophesy in that sense. But in terms of most of my work of the past several years, let's put it that way, I've been concerned with the forms or with the necessities of the individual personalities, both. And that being to the extent that there's a necessity in myself that break up whatever mask I'm wearing to permit a new expression. And that's very hard, because in order to adhere to that necessity in an age of so many distractions in the art and in life, I have to come at that mask with from the inside of myself out with a tremendous battery of charged experience, which is already formed and which does tend to make other masks form immediately. And always a mask referential to the past one. So I have to keep shifting slowly through all these masks, creating new ones that break up the old one, and so forth. You know, just to speak very metaphorically here.
That's what I meant.
What do you mean?
I meant, yes, that every new manner, every new manner of doing things is a new mask which breaks up the old one. Not just a breakup. It's a new mask.
Okay, but I can be clear here. The moment which excites me, and one of the impulses which is most of necessity of my, which is the necessity of my making works, is that moment of transformation, mask to mask.
Right. Yeah.
Now,
and life goes on that way. You know, then it's not so.
Yeah, like it doesn't excite me. I'm not after the end of the perfect mask. And one thing that I fear, and I think that Jane's pointing out here, of the disturbance with the with randomness, chance operations as theory, or really we're talking about John Cage's book Silence here, as all those theories are expressed in Silence. His book Silence is the worry, you know, like that might. The danger of that becoming a bell-shaped mask in itself as an end, which everyone would try to wear, and yeah, like that's like that. There might be an ultimate there. That book is premised very much as if there is an ultimate in these operations. That these operations are working to an ultimate. Now, I am not ever working to an ultimate. I'm working for out of necessity, out of necessity for growth. And transformation is the moment that excites me the most, because that's where I'm most clearly aware of a moving out and of a freedom of mask, in a sense, for pouring in of material in some new way. And it's in this ebb and flow of external experience and my own expression thereof, and that makes possible the most growth in relationship to other. Say in this case to Jane most clearly in my life, and where we can meet is in moments of transformation. That's where we meet the clearest. So, like, to the extent that we're romantic about this, we seem to meet in moments of transformation, as if being there in person were not the point then, because masks were shifting, changing, and we come closest together. And I think for a more general gathering, it would be in moments of transformation. At this time, that's why I think ritual betrays us, always. A gathering together of people in terms of ritual, any ritual, tends in this time, or in my experience of this time, to always be a betrayal of each and every individual, because
Except in Blue Moses.
No.
All right, every Saturday. What happened? You spoke of it as a ritual. That's the word you used, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Well, I'm very tempted to begin here, like to pull on Dr. Jung's sin here, in some sense.
Okay.
Berthan said Bava.
All right, I'll let him out. I'll get him out.
Well,
let's get Bertham out here. Yeah. Like, God. I'm hard put to it here. To invoke Jung's sin, in the sense of saying that of my work of recent years, Blue Moses interests me less than almost any other film. But, you see, I always think, like, Charles Olson was very clear when he saw Blue Moses. He says, that's the damnedest propaganda film I ever saw. And what he was, I take him to be referring directly to there is the like propaganda film for film, and of film, and by film, and whatever other such words you want to stick in there. And Blue Moses is but then I'm going to chuck any sense of sin here and just say there's a work that passed through me in a situation of intended ritual.
yours.
And try to deal with that. It's very hard for me because
Oh, you go on and sit down. You've been eating all day.
All right, I'll put it this way. Really, right now, I have to come to terms with Blue Moses, at least in this sense. I say it's a mystery to me why I was engaged in that process at the time I was, and the process out of which that came is at this moment very mysterious to me, and the mystery of it is what excites me at this moment more than anything else. Not, that it was the mystery, why it was such a ritual, and how it brought, but that was part of the drive of making Blue Moses was I, or put some simple terms, I wanted to, it was a necessity to see if I could work with an actor again or could collaborate with an other beside Jane. Now, Blue Moses is relevant in some way to the processes in which Jane and I work together. We have a whole ritual going, which is the ritual of our life. And within that ritual, that ritual permits the working works of art to pass through in some charged fashion that's with respect to every entity within this house, the plants even. Now that's a ritual which is a living daily ritual. And it's created partly by us, and it's always created by us, but created out of specific living necessities. Now, with Blue Moses, that was out of a necessity too, in this sense that I felt the necessity to work with this person whom I'd known this long in this fashion, in this ritualistic fashion. He would arrive every Saturday. Well, in a way, I don't think it should be too mysterious. It's probably just mysterious to me in the sense of how I wish I could dance with all the world like I dance with Jane and my children. That was the case where we contrived to create a ritual in which a dance was permitted with one other person. Maybe the mystery should be why I haven't pursued that further. The processes, again, are pretty much the same. Does that answer something to you, Jane, about that, or does that seem right, in some way?
Yes.
Yes, she says while she's feeding the multitudes in there. Like a loud yes for the microphone here,
Yes!
two rooms away. See, like that. There's the mystery. Ordinarily, she could say yes quietly, and if I didn't hear, I'd get up and go in there. But now we got a ritual going which centers on this microphone. Now that's very mysterious. That's like unusual. I don't know what,
It makes me nervous!
Yeah, me nervous too, but that's the way in which Blue Moses, the processes thereof, make me nervous. That was a ritual in which, instead of microphone, we had every Saturday, and this person coming out to our house that I had known more or less for years, but didn't know that well, and we contrived, and it took months. He had to come Saturday after Saturday for months before we could begin shooting. We had to get enough of a ritual going so that it became natural enough, i.e. of his and my necessity, that it could approximate the processes that have become very natural in our in the livelihood of our house. And under that hood, there is a going ritual constantly which clearly arises out of necessity because it has enough, or which I can call natural maybe because it happens so often and in so many ways, and with the grain there is thrown in so many possible ways that it tends toward a bell-shaped curve type hood. And that reaching out, which was to make that ritual with another person to create a work of art, was as strange as like you're being here in this microphone. We're trying to engage a whole ritual in this house that will center on this microphone, but this hasn't been here long enough, this microphone here in the center of this table. Like if you came every day, every Saturday at, for so-and-so long, and if I were a word artist, and you were too, or you were a recording artist, and we were collaborating, and this microphone sat so many Saturdays on this table at this place, and we kept working at it, we might get a work of art on tape there. But then, that's just to give you a picture of that process of Blue Moses. But really, like it isn't like that at all. But it's approximate. This is a strange thing, like we're not used to having a microphone right here. To get used to it so that one doesn't use it, I think that's what's involved. Like that's why it takes a young artist a long time working before depth and complexity begins to arise through his orders. He has to get used to that process too, and to growing through it, and then it becomes then he's no longer using it.
So in other words, you would have a tough time making a film on a scheduled sort of thing if the time involved wasn't long enough for you to become accustomed to it.
Well, if my necessities demanded that I make a film, say, with a cast of thousands, which could still happen sometime, I doubt it, but it could happen, a cast of thousands, a historical drama that required the machinations of a studio and working through a motion picture studio and with cameramen and so on and so forth, it's more and more unlikely the more I talk about it, but if for some reason my necessities demanded that, then I would have to make home there. I would have to make a living room out of a barn of a studio. And one ought to be able, ideally, to make one's living room anywhere. Like if you get stuck in a barn at night because it's raining and you've got the hay and a couple cows and maybe even Jesus Christ is coming, you ought to be able to make a home there. Somehow I think whatever it was happened, all those thousands of years ago in Jerusalem, whatever happened there, at least I know what 2,000 years of Christianity has swung around in terms of that manger scene, it being a living room that we're used to. And when we're no longer used to it, as the Christians weren't at first, it begins using us, which is what happens now, more and more. And that's like if I had to have that barn in the rain at night because my necessities drove me into it and all my family, and we sat there in the hay and whatnot, we'd have to make home there. And like, it's funny, almost a pun, like make hay there. And sure, like that, like whatever was available would have to, be involved in the making. And so if I had to use studios, like if, then I would have to make home there, and I would have to, for the art impulse to pass through. And if you read accounts of what early movie studios were, they were more like home. I mean, it wasn't like an abstract situation like it is today. People more kind of gathered, and they had their kind of home there. And or at least wherever they did have that, whatever kind of kooky home they had. I'm thinking of what kind of home Carl Dreyer would make, for instance. Like if their home insisted that someone had to be threatened with being burned at the stake or something, that would still have to be, he'd have to make hay of the material at hand, like make a home there for the impulse to travel through there in some sense, be at home there. And I mean home in the sense too, ought to be clear of MacDonald's sense, a place you can go into and come out of. That's how he defined home. And wherever that could be made, I think the impulse of processes could pass through. Even making home of an ivory tower, like obviously some people at certain periods could only make home in I don't know any artist ever had an ivory tower, ever could have afforded one, but let's say in any kind of a tower, like Robinson Jeffers, I went and saw when he stacked 500 rocks, one on top of another, and made a little teeny tower on the sea, like, that was enough. How disappointed I was when I was 18 and went to see Robinson Jeffers' tower. And it was this little stack of rocks. But it was a tower to him, and like it had become in letters a tower to damn near anybody who hadn't seen it, and I suppose those who knew his love of it saw it as a tower even when they'd seen it, and he certainly had a tower there and went into it, and that was his home. And I think that's, like the point. Then The impulse can pass through, sure, but that takes time to get used to. So it would take a long time. It would take such a long time for me to make a home in a motion picture studio, and I don't know one that'd be possible. Like, there's some places that just... I wouldn't like to say there's no place... I wouldn't like to say there's any place on earth where anyone couldn't make home. But I say there's certainly some places that are very rough to be at home in, like, a New York subway, for me. Although I see New Yorkers who have ridden on them for years and years, make a home there. They still smell of the bed sheets having gotten out in the morning, and they're jammed in so tight they can't do anything, but they're reading their morning papers and swaying back and forth, and that's kind of a home for them on the way to work, And for me, home in a motion picture studio would be, I suppose, just about as impossible as it would be for a New Yorker who'd never been off the island in his life to make home on a craggy mountaintop, which is a place where I make home very easily. And so it becomes again then by an individual matter. It was very hard for me to be at home with this this person I'd known all his life, but which was essentially a stranger, arriving every day at, on Saturday, every Saturday at such and such a time for this ritual. So I don't think Blue Moses, maybe the mistake of Blue Moses, what made it a work that doesn't interest me as some of the others, is that I didn't take it naturally enough. I thought of it too much as a separate, apart ritual without realizing that our whole life is a ritual. We make ritual in every movement, and in every gesture, and in that interrelationship with all other gestures. And I'm trying all this time to make you at home here. And which is that if you aren't at home here, and you are here in this house, I can't be at home here either, see? So the more at home you feel, and the more we can extend, take into consideration this microphone which is running and make it at home here, the more relaxed we get, and the more, possible it is to be.
Hey, Crystal. There. Come on, babe.
Do you have some... you said, I think you've implied that you don't have any goal, that you're striving for. Anything really specific. But do you have some sort of...
Well, I have goals, but not ends in themselves.
Yeah.
Not an end in itself, if you want to differentiate that from a goal. Although some people don't differentiate a goal from an end in itself. And everything is driving toward this end in itself.
Well, is your end anything more than just trying to expand the bounds of your art?
That isn't an end, and that isn't even a goal. Like, if tomorrow my necessities no longer required the creation of works of art, or working with those processes with, like, I don't create a work of art, I just work, and I work. What makes it an art is its relationship to other arts. I am an instrument that is charged out of my own, again, necessities and concerns with art as a form. And all that is in me, so what passes through within my medium, which is film, comes to terms and is in relationship and dances with, is a better way to put it, with all that I know. My experience, and a large part of that experience is from reading works of art, looking at works of art, listening to them. That's a large part of my experience. So what passes naturally through me of my necessity is in relationship to that, and many call it art. If anyone wants not to, that doesn't bother me, Like if suddenly art is defined, as many people are trying to, in certain ways that doesn't relate to my work, that process will still go on. And similarly, if tomorrow I find my necessity moving me to do something that doesn't even seem to me in relationship to that art, then I will do that of necessity. And I'm always working that way. And like I have to get simple about this some point. As near as I know, and I don't even know that for sure, death will be the end of my life. And whatever happens then, I might speculate about, but I'm not vitally concerned with it except as intimations of it reach me through my living experience. And most clearly through my living experience in the given moment, which is right now. But I have, been convinced by much of my experience that at some time I will die. And, like that's the only end I have in view. And much in my experience has convinced me that that will not be the end. And certainly, for some part of my system that I am concerned with, like the matter and the water I'm composed of, and the traces, that have passed through me, the forms, and my own thought, that is, thoughts that have come into being through me, that those will not end there at my death. And much of my matter and material just is transforming, really. From a strictly scientific standpoint, death is simply a transformation. And from an aesthetic standpoint, it becomes clearly that too. So I meet that many of the forms of science with the form of art at that point, and we're in agreement that death is a transformation. But as to the consciousness, as to my consciousness at the moment of death, I and no one else really has a clear, I won't speak about anyone else. I'll say I have no clear idea what the transformation of my consciousness will be at that instant. And so we can say the only end I have in view is consciously I can only have end in itself in mind as end of consciousness, which experience has led me to believe occurs at death, and that's being about as specific about as I can. Until then, I intend, as my intentions are in this living moment, to keep learning, growing, and following out of necessity wherever that necessity impels me to move. And that's that I share with the planarian. And whereas I don't share with him the ability to cut off, to lose my head and grow another. I do share with that creature which is to follow impulse and necessity in that sense. I believe I share that with him, and then that leads me to believe that my total organism probably shares that working order in living with with individual heart cells of mine beating. And
well, in the context of each film you do, you must have some end or some goal that you're trying to reach.
That becomes a very let's say psychological matter. Whatever impulse starts me in a direction, and we'll say now in the working orders in making a film, starts me in the direction of taking pictures, which is most usually the start of making a film for me. Whatever impulse starts me in that direction is out of a necessity, and until something is fulfilled, or there's a sense of fulfillment within me, so that necessity is no longer goading me on, I continue to work. And so the end that's involved there is the end of that particular feeling necessity, or my consciousness thereof, which is how I feel it. And sometimes I feel as if all senses were engaged. And I've even gone down the list. Scientists now say there's 27 of them, and a great number of those seem to me to be actively engaged when there's an impulse or a necessity moving through. And I suppose you'd call that a completion, and I would at that point say that's the completion of that necessity. Now, when the completion of that necessity coincides with the completion of something that's complete unto itself, then I call that a finished work of art. But very often, well, not too often, but let's say pretty often, that necessity ends before I have done more than take some pictures. And very often that necessity ends before I've finished editing, and then though, like, there is no work of art then. It's just or that material that I had taken under that necessity may feed into some other work of necessity again that I did not have in mind. So at any stage a necessity can seem to be satisfied, and I can stop. And in some certain sense, at every stage, like when I see one image, and I set up the camera and I seek to transform my feeling of that image so it comes through on film as some approximation and in some relationship to that thing seen, and I've pressed the button on the camera, and then I've stopped pressing the button on the camera. Some necessity has ended there. The necessity to press that button, and the necessity to be working at that particular image or scene, and at each stage to proceed in that sense, but always with some sense of the total ritual going on. That is, that individual necessity, which is pressing the button and not pressing the button, is keyed in with all of the what we call now, as we define ritualistic sense of that scene.
Well, I
So
think also you can say that the need at the moment when you're taking your finger off the button is that's what the necessity is. I mean, it's not a thing of ending, it's just a thing of positive need. That shot needs to be transformed then into something else or something.
Yeah, but usually I feel it as that an impulse has been satisfied. And I rather, I would like to think that when my life ends, it will be in the same sense, that an impulse has ended and is ready for transformation, like what button next, or what's the next scene. I would like to think I'd die with a view in mind of what's the next scene, which is to say, not that I would expect this form would come to terms with the next scene, but that I'd like that impulse to be running through my sensibility when it fades out, so that what I'd be prepared, for whatever might happen. But the I would probably disappear. See, like, it's hard to talk about it in these terms, but what I mean is, I just mean that I'd like to die with some feeling like that. What's the next scene, whether there was one or not? Because I never know from instant to instant. As I lift finger off a button, I never know whether there's going to be another picture taken, and I have to work in those terms to keep clear, or whether that picture that was taken is going to be in any work later. Because if it is, it must go into that work at the editing stage of necessity, out of a direct impulse. And but all must continually answer to whatever ritual's going, or whatever ritual we've made, whether it be every Saturday, or whether it be out of the daily living rituals, which are constantly growing, changing, etc. The danger of every Saturday is, and for a certain period of time, is that there's no sense of continuity, that it's going on and on. At some point we have this sense that this will be a particular every Saturday ritual that'll come to its completion. And that can tend, if one isn't very careful, to impose an artificiality upon the forms that are arising out of that kind of contingency, that aren't so likely, that aren't such a danger in the existence here, we think. But then everything can change immediately here too, like it's quite a crucial shift to be suddenly here in a New York apartment 6 flights up with those sounds coming through the window, which I did not expect, 4 months ago. Or didn't expect until we were here, actually, because I didn't have not the experience. Well, there's danger always at any move like that to jump to artificiality, which is to say to be there in person to create a mask. That's to ward off rather than to be one for transformation or a direct outgrowth of a shucking off of a previous layer of skin. And to protect oneself, so to speak, to come under a shell, or like grow a tortoise shell or something to protect. But so that's why it's hard, the danger is artificiality at a moment like that. And but also, like, artificiality begins with art, and you know, artificial in that sense, and that roots straight back to art. And in one sense, I have to be clear about it. Every time I move to some new place, my work flows through me quicker, faster, easier than it does usually in a long continuity in a single place. So there is something of you know, of, because that is real transformation. That's the ritual that we carry with us everywhere. The way Jane moves her arms when turning the eggs, having to come to terms with a new shaped pan, which is a moment of transformation, and there's a flow. And it flows through me in the same terms when I'm at the working table and in the working process. And it's, you know.
See, well, I might be on rather...
But the danger is tending to use it, you see what I mean, like, and not be used to it. And so really, I have to be very cautious at a time of new moving and get maybe very clear about it, which makes work process better in just having moved. I have to get very clear to be used to it, not to use it, or at least to not use it. I have to be very clear that nothing's being used in any specious sense as a protection. At that moment.
I've only seen one of your films, but I can just go the impressions I get from reading. If we take Gregory's work, there seems to be a lot of similarity, general similarity in his work, such as his films always deal with love in some form or another, or say in Swain, he used his first recapitulation, he used it in Twice a Man, he's going to use it in the Iliad Passion. There seems to be sort of a...
I don't think he uses it. As long as we've been careful to define the word use, I have to be clear here, he doesn't use things in that sense, or he wouldn't, or that kind of feeling wouldn't pass through his works as it does. Like, there's no sense of love. I was glad when you said similarity, that how he's engaged with love, and I don't see love as possible in a situation of use. I mean, human beings usually define that as a form of prostitution, and if he were involved in using these things, I could be, you know, they would be works of prostitution, not of love. And it's, you know, like there is such a thing as the prostitute who has love in terms where she can think of as being, you know, a lover. That's harder and harder because there's no ritual for that. There's no temple of love going anymore. So we don't have, you know, prostitution as a religion. But there can be the loving prostitute in that sense, and those produce, I think, like Fellini and De Sica. And you know, Bergman in a way are, you know, prostitutes of love. But Gregory, I take as being quite something else. Seems to me he's pretty clear on most levels not to be using things. So that the love that one feels there is very direct, to, you know, in relationship to, you know, passes through very direct, and he loves what he's doing.
Yeah, I'm using use in a strict physical sense. In the
Don't use it.
Yeah, like don't use. Like, make yourself at home.
All right, but what word do you suggest I use?
Oh,
I can't use employ. Can I use employ? That.
Hey, you like, don't use any word like that man speak. Yeah. You know, don't worry about using words. Just what relationship do you see in Gregory's work? Which film of mine have you seen? Like, get specific.
I've seen Prelude.
Prelude, good.
Yeah. But what
okay.
all right, let me try and get at the heart of the matter.
All right, good. The heart of the matter. Bless you. Good.
Okay. I'm just getting from what I'm reading that one film of yours is quite different from the next, and this obvious difference isn't so apparent in Gregory's work. Although I'm not putting his work down, I think it's magnificent. And so, do you consciously carry one aspect of your work on to another, or do you try and escape this completely? from it as you can.
Well, I think no, there's no. I'm not consciously trying to be different, if that's what you mean. Ever.
No, but
And
Gregory,
any more than Gregory is consciously being concerned with a similarity from one work to another. Where you may see a similarity in his earliest and his latest work, or a style, he has his work forms itself in a certain way that he focuses on a particular area, which permits the charge, which is, I think, just as completely as authentic in his work as mine, to pass through within that area, and that area defines what appears as what is a style, or what I think we can call a style. His style is more apparent in his work, and I mean style now in the sense of that thing which does not. I mean style in the sense of what you could say soul. Like his soul is more apparent. I mean it in this sense. This like I've heard that someone passed all the way through had gone so batty and insane. This person passed all the way through a series of electrical shock treatments and had lost even memory of previous events, and all of personality had changed. But this person was a poet whose poems carried the same style before and after this experience in the insane asylum. And this is a triumph of what style can be, that style can survive all changes of personality. His personality had been altered utterly, his masks, so to speak, from the whole personality had been so altered that like friends couldn't even hardly recognize him on the street, but his style had remained unchanged, his poetic style. And
the subject matter changed, I think, didn't it?
I'm not sure.
Areas
of interest certainly changed, but style did not. And and Gregory's style seemed to me in that story so apparent as being like soul, the most indestructible thing in this man at least, and I think in all men, is style. Now actually, that level of my style hasn't changed from the very first film through to the very latest any more than in Gregory's work. But his style in his work is more apparent. It's more. He has it more there on the surface. My style is more of a center thread. I can make metaphors here. I'm just thinking on my feet. I'm not sure this is true, but I think my style is more of like a center thread, which runs as impulse through all these variations. Gregory's style is more more apparent. Those are the working terms, or his order. Wouldn't you say that's so, Jane?
I couldn't say.
I don't know. It's pretty hard for me to say too, but I think that's what makes. It's really style you're talking about here. Now, actually, if you haven't seen much of my work.
You have a very definite style.
Yeah.
I think I can't say.
I've had people
Gregory's
say
films
that they
are different, altogether different. Serenity is so different from Twice a Man, which is so different from his trilogy. I don't know, the style.
Let me put it this way. I get a clarity from what you're saying. I think it's really this, that it's that there are certain things that people look at, that most people look at or are more conscious of than others. Like I think like color. People are more conscious in viewing works of art in film, say, of color or tone if it's black and white, than they are say, of rhythm. And Gregory's art, one thing that would seem to me to be a style, if I saw one of his works thrown out of focus, and on a screen, I could almost, and everything, but just had the color to go by, I could probably determine his style from that, because there's a way in which color.
I would determine it by rhythm. I think different people see different things.
There you have it. You see, I don't know how to come to terms with this, because it's true, there's a specific rhythm.
Like even maybe the heart cells or something of Gregory run that way, or who knows what.
There are people that say I pass through various changes in my work, and the work is, but I know there's an unbroken style which runs straight through, which I become a parent of. There is in Gregory's work too. It may be that you are more, let's put it this way, that you are more aware of, no, well, you've only seen one of my works, so that wouldn't go here.
Well, in Gregory's films, he has certain things that I might call them leitmotifs throughout his whole complex of his work, such as, well, in Psyche, the man comes up from behind the girl and puts his hand on his shoulder. The same thing in Twice a Man. Albert comes up to Paul. And,
oh, I see what you mean. Well, we can get clear about that. You mean subject matter in that sense.
Yes.
Like the heart of the matter.
Or the heart of the matter. Or even...
All right, subject matter... Gregory always has his Greek origins in specific reference in all his work, and that does make an unbroken line of tradition through all his work in a way that you do not find that in my work. My work doesn't cast itself in terms of specific relationship like that. But more I think about, like Jane's right. I don't think there's any distinction. I think Gregory's style is as unbroken and straightforward, straight through all his works, as is mine, as is any artist's. And more I think about, I don't think the style sense is on the surface more than his work than in mine, or that mine is his center thread. I think that's out. That's not right. It's just that he has a specific reference to Greek symbol. His Greek heritage is always very large in him, and is an unbroken line through all his works. I can't think of any specific impulse that I could say runs as anything that would define content, or that you could talk about that would run through all my works in that way. No. So that might be the distinction you're after here. Although it's pretty hard to talk about it in order to get your views on it, as you've only seen one of my works.
Is there going to be any shown around here next?
Huh. Well, you know that problem as well as I do. New York City has become one of the most difficult places in the world that I know of to show works of art. I could show them easier in Denver, Colorado right now than New York City, which is supposed to be art capital of this country or something, because the police and the authorities and whatnot have made it practically impossible to show films or read poetry or do anything in this city at the moment. So I feel like I'm in a 19th century small town that's making a lot of noise, a lot of sound and fury, signifying nothing at the moment, and that isn't really a true picture of New York, but it happens to be the one that's hitting us on the social level at this time. They're not suddenly there's like Jonas is facing court charges for showing pornography. The theaters are being closed. The poets' theaters have been closed and padlocked. So, like, that's the social scene that we're trying to come to terms with here. And I just wonder if, in relationship to that, but right here in the middle of this, one of the best showings I ever had, and I'm sorry both you and Gregory missed it. The other night we went up to the Filmmakers Co-op office with all the children, and that place is a beautiful living room in a way. And about 20 people sat down in it on the floor and on couches and things, and I had one of the best showings of Dog Star Man I've ever had, in the sense that it was not a theatrical scene in any sense of the word, and there were great living sensibilities of such a large number as you could only find it in New York City. That many people of that much sensibility and care and concern, all sitting in that beautiful place watching Dog Star Man, and that's so I can't say we haven't had good shows here. We've had one of the best showings I've ever had in my life, and I wouldn't trade that for any number of showings at a New York theater or college auditorium or anything else. That was like real beauty, and maybe if the authorities and so on are going to make it difficult for us to have showings in auditoriums and theaters, I mean, we ought to take our cues from that and go for what's always more beautiful anyway, like go back into our living rooms. They're charging, I'll give you one example, like it came to me as very important. The U.S. Postal Services were not going to permit the usual rates on the film culture issue that was my book, Metaphors on Vision, because they said it was an amateurish job. It was amateur. And they couldn't call it a professional book and a magazine and let it go through on those rates. And they had to fight a real battle to permit it to go through the postal offices as something other than amateur. And I thought, well, how odd, you know. Well, if that's what the postal authorities define as amateur, I can live by that term because I know the etymology of the word amateur, you know, and I know that book was made of love. And I say, fine, let's become amateurs then, and have our showings in our living rooms, and I'm finding less and less reason for worrying about whether the postal authorities will take things, or whether theaters will be permitted to us, or whether audiences will gather and see these works. That's the scene that we're in at the moment, as you know. And main thing I'm getting from New York right now is this, all those beautiful people that have gathered here, and that's enough, more than enough. And some of the other side events that I thought we'd get here, like going out to theaters or going into a bookstore and finding great new poetry books that had been published, well, I find the theaters that would interest me are being shut down and closed by the police, and the bookstores, I find that none of the publishers have published anything that really deeply interests me in the last 4 months, except Louis Zukowski's Bottom on Shakespeare. Well, it'll take me about 5 years to read as much as I want to out of Zukowski's Bottom on Shakespeare, and I can do it in my living room. And the New York Times isn't reviewing it anyway, and I don't need the New York Times review to have it, and I've got a copy of it, and I've got what I need, in other words, in my living room. And New York for us right here at this time is all our friends. And the only social way we're involved is to keep them out of jail at the moment. And to help them, so that they can retreat back into their living rooms and I hope give up this whole social scene, give up trying to impress Life and Time magazine, and give up trying to transform, to try to do a 400-year transformation in 4 months or something. Like this world takes a long, long time to change. In the meantime, everything that's ever vital in my life that's important to me happened in my living room, and I think that's where everyone's real changes occur, or at least, I won't say everyone's, I don't know, like, where I've really come, seen change. Where I've transformed in the clearest terms. And that's where I make my work, and that's where I've had the best showings of it. Yeah, we're kind of running down.